This is Epstein, Photogénie and the Soul by George Hamilton. Introduction to Epstein and his ideas. John Epstein lived and breathed cinema, and in doing so the screen appeared to breathe back for him. Nature, life and emotion are all enhanced tenfold by his control over cinema, and his experimentation into the parameters of filmmaking, a practice still finding its feet in the early 20th century. French Impressionism, the movement that Epstein was a part of, was rooted in the establishing of the belief that film was an art form in of itself, and can be held largely responsible for many significant developments and the birth of techniques that are still apparent in cinema today. An example of this can be found in Epstein's notable use of slow-motion filming, which he used to enhance and put focus on the intricacies of the things that he shot. It forces the audience's attention into being swamped by the vastness and depth of the frame, as the fleeting moment is allowed to linger for our inspection. This idea is also particularly apparent in the way that he looks at and uses close-ups, as we are able to search for deeper messages and details that go beyond the surface. Le cinématographe vu de l'Etna. In this text we are provided with Epstein's direct and unwavering enthrallment by the eruption of the volcano Etna in Italy. Despite the overarching message of the writing being based on the core cinematic elements of the way that we perceive the world around us, he takes on a dramatically whimsical and poetic tone, his work reading more like prose than anything related to cinematic theory. The writing itself feels alive and tangential, adding to the immersion as he describes each tiny element of the scene he is beholding, each fleeting process and microscopic feature from the burning leaves to the flaring of a nearby donkey's nostril. It's an assault on our senses, and we are forced to sit and bear witness to the seemingly endless pantheon of details that make up what he sees before him, as each thought comes to him. My chosen line. In front of me, at Nancy, a room with 300 people moaned when they saw a grain of wheat germinate on screen. Suddenly the true visage of life and death, of a terrifying love, appeared, provoking these religious outcries. What churches, if we only knew how to construct them, could accommodate a spectacle like this, where life itself is revealed? I find this line to be particularly effective in summarising the exclusivity that the notion of photogeny creates, where the moments caught on film are only able to be captured on film and cannot be found elsewhere. Cinema becomes a unique way of storing these moments. It also describes the depth that film can convey. Due to the simplicity of the idea that a fragment of time is being caught and preserved onto this flat screen, we have the ability to read into it as deeply as we like, pulling subtext and the nuanced layering of the messages from within the frame. It has the ability to store so many elements and notions and feelings all at once. Magnification. This text is more directly focused on the theory and practice of filmmaking, and yet despite this, it is still brimming with Epstein's flair and soulful interjects. He writes with a constant train of thought that differs from the majority of theory writing, emotion seeming to take over where the technical usually takes centre stage. He discusses the way that he views and watches and takes in films in an almost mesmerised trance. His views on cinema are as though he is speaking its exclusive language. He can sense cinema's profound power and impact that cinema will have, even going as far as to pledge warning, theatre, watch out. He acknowledges the core idea of magnification as a method of immersion, that the stage cannot provide, building an intimate insight into the suffering and emotion. My chosen line. The close-up modifies the drama by the impact of proximity. Pain is within reach. If I stretch out my arm, I touch you, and that is intimacy. I can count the eyelashes of this suffering. I would be able to taste the tears. This idea of full and total immersion, surrendering yourself to the screen and the impression that the filmmaker wants to convey, is one that we can still see becoming apparent today with technological developments in cinemas like IMAX or VR. The closer you get to the screen, the more detail and intricacy you become aware of, taking in the film in its most complete and fullest entirety. You begin to be able to shut out any other distraction. It ties you intrinsically to the performance on screen and works to strengthen the sympathetic bond. My close-up. In order to encapsulate the ideas that Epstein focuses on, I chose to focus on a similar theme to that which he does in Finished Terrain, the power and vitality of nature with a particular focus on rushing water. His writing consistently has an untethered and untamable feel as each line runs over itself, growing and swelling with passion and life. I must interrupt, he writes in Magnification, essentially summing up the core tone of his works, writhing with energy as though it were a force of nature too. Beginning with a slightly wider shot, I hope to direct the audience's attention to the central subject of the leaf, through framing and using the naturally more eye-catching colours that pick it out of the scene. As Epstein says, I wanted the viewer to have neither the right nor the ability to be distracted. I then bring the shot inwards to a close-up on the leaf shaking in the stiff wind. as I try to garner sympathy for this subject, playing into Epstein's idea of pumping soul into the inanimate through the use of close-up shots. It breaks down the barriers between the audience and the subject, as Epstein writes in the cinematograph Vue de l'Etna, allowing their emotions and struggles to become almost tangible. As well as the leaf, I was keen to have a strong focus on the unstoppable flow of the water, with varying shots of the river splashing, shot in such a way that it appears crashing and destructive. It finds its way around any object that stands in its path and fills the space entirely. Photogénie in Finis Terrae. Finis Terrae is a film centred around life and its miniature details, from the ever-worsening cut on the thumb of Ambroise, a young fisherman, to the deteriorating interpersonal relationships of the characters living on the island. Photogénie itself is the concept of capturing a moment or the feeling that can only be brought to life or encapsulated by a film. And Finis Terrae achieves this to great effect, with the numerous shots of crashing waves, their power and individuality so extreme that no two shots are the same. The film is rife with soul and vitality too, different aspects shot in such a way that feels so alive they become characters themselves. The close-up on Ambroise's infected thumb separates it from him, and as the injury worsens with an impending and visceral dread, its thriving is shot with such intense detail. Photogénie in wider context. Epstein's influence is so integral to the history and development of cinema that we can plainly see examples of how the idea of photogénie has bled through to films in the century that has followed. It can be present in shots of nature and the inanimate, as well as ones that focus on people and emotion. Examples of its presence in cinema that come to mind include the following. The Royal Tenenbaums, directed by Wes Anderson. In this brief sequence of shots, we witness the first moment these two characters see each other in years, as each of their faces morph between looks of surprise, relief, adoration, but specked with hints of sympathy and forced by the cut between Gwyneth Paltrow, framed in sunlight and her hair moved gently by the breeze, in a slight slow-mo, to Luke Wilson, shot in a much closer and less flattering angle. We see the juxtaposition between the pair. He comes across humbled by seeing her and is removed from the world he is in just by the sight of her arrival, alienated from the rest of his surroundings by the shallow depth of field. The range of emotions is so vast, and the intricacies of the subject we can read from the looks that pass over them, and their faces softening, can be attributed to their performance, but also feels as though it is something so intimate and fleeting that it could only have been captured in this brief shot. Ran, directed by Akira Kurosawa. In one of the most powerful and evocative shots from Ran, we see a long shot of Hidetora standing in the entrance to his burning castle. The sheer scale and magnitude of the scene is overwhelming and bordering incomprehensible, with hundreds of extras in intensely detailed costumes framing the shot. The fire itself rages as the key focus, seemingly alive as it ravages the set piece. The plumes of smoke billow and twist upon themselves, and it feels so unique and unreproducible that this take could only be captured here in that moment. As the film progresses, we see Hidetora's appearance drastically change as his mental state deteriorates, his face appearing increasingly ghoulish. The intense and theatrical makeup allows for his emotions to be entirely heightened, and in certain close-up shots he seems to portray an unfathomably nuanced combination of emotions, once again demonstrating the power that cinema has in being able to capture the unbelievable. Counterpoints. In order to accurately define the concept of photogénie, it might also be useful to look at examples in films where the opposite is in effect. Moments that do not strive to capture the fleeting and momentary and provide a disconnect, and strip its subjects and surroundings of their agency and vitality and individual unrepeatability. One that springs to mind is David Byrne's True Stories, a film that focuses on capturing a regular slice of life in a small rural Texan town. Despite the plot sounding as though the film would take a naturalistic and grounded tone with its depictions, what we get instead is an absurdist, almost Lynchian series of observations from the whimsical and playful perspective of David Byrne. Where there are these brief moments that could only be conveyed through film, they are instead more peculiar and staged and rooted in a childish naivety. The film is entirely aware of its format and the audience, and the writing is wooden and the interactions noticeably scripted. But this only lends to the charm of the film. Each character feels like a mannequin inhabiting the set, and feels entirely reproducible. However, zooming out from the technical specifics in relation to Epstein, the film as a whole is so charmingly individual because of this. Epstein can be firmly placed as one of the leading figures in the history of cinema, and the beauty with which he sees and describes the artistry within filmmaking as a medium is so spirited and unique, it truly makes sense where a person so passionate about their craft got the idea for a theory so energetic and charged. It's staggering to see that even at the early stages of the industry, he had such a profound foresight into the potential it held, and showed such an impressive grasp over the technology that his films and theories still hold up to this day. This is my bibliography, and that's my filmography. Thank you.